you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to you because you do a much better job introducing yourself than I ever could. So floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, ladies, and thanks for everyone who's attending. Hopefully I can strike some interest in you as far as the practice of law and also particularly the military service, which can provide some great opportunity for you. So my background, I was a enlisted guy that became an officer, and then I became an attorney. So my career is almost third. The first third of my career was I started in 1988. And then I went to the Gulf War with 1st Tank Battalion. So I was a combat vet in the first Gulf War. We had the largest tank battle in Marine Corps history. So then we move along. I became an officer. I served with artillery for a little while, and then moved up to the command deck, working with the generals, and then I eventually applied for the law program. They picked 2 in the Marine Corps a year because we're not a smart bunch. And then I was successfully selected for that and moved into Temple up in Philadelphia, birthplace of the Marine Corps, Tongue Tavern, also the Constitution of the United States. And went back, went to Iraq, 05, 06 in Ramadi and Fallujah. Tough tour, operational tour, dealing with operational law, and also I was the sole prosecutor for M&F West, which is all the land west of Baghdad. So we're dealing with law of armed conflict stuff, which I can get into. And then I said I wanted to go to an island. I was thinking Hawaii, and they sent me to Parris Island for some sand fleas down in South Carolina. So I went to South Carolina. I was about to retire, and then they said, we've got a new job for you. Let's send you to Guantanamo commissions. So I thought I was getting assigned as a prosecutor, given that I'm from New York and, I'd spent a career running down the bad guys. I was like, okay, this could be cool. And they put me in defense. And so that was an interesting wake-up call. So I'll speak a little bit about that. I've been in practice since 2002. Takeaway number 1 for me is if you're interested in military service, and this is world according to Montalvo, nobody else, but it does start with the Constitution. And I'm not trying to get all, big-headed about this, but it really does. And it starts with your oath, because the very first thing you say when you enlist or when you get promoted, you're taking an oath, and it's oath to the Constitution of the United States to protect it, to protect our Constitution from enemies, both abroad and domestic, right? So people that are out there in the world trying to get us and people within the United States trying to get us. It doesn't say what the citizenship of those people are. It says we defend our way of life here, okay, from anybody who tries to take it away. And so that's a pretty solemn oath. And when you join the military, you're committing to that premise. And there's a lot of integrity that has to come from that because it's hard sometimes to determine who is coming after us and how that's happening. And, war is not fun. People die. That's not what we really want in the world. War is not a good outcome. It's a failure of diplomacy is what it ends up being most of the time. And so it's not a glorified thing to get involved in. One wants to see their friends and colleagues, perish on the battlefield. These are not good things, right? However, if you get into the business, you have to keep your compass straight, because sometimes it gets confusing. Sometimes it gets hard. Sometimes you don't understand exactly all that you're getting yourself into. That's why the military structure is very important. And your baseline is key. You have to have the fundamentals. And the fundamental is, what is your core? Why are you there? What is your mission? What is your oath? And stay within that. And then it'll also always drive you to the right outcome. Case in point, and I'll start with probably the craziest story that I got myself into, and that was the Guantanamo Commission. So as a personal, connection to this. First, I'm from New York. Part of my family was involved as firefighters in New York. I was in law school when 9/11 occurred. I lost some people in 9/11, okay, family members. Um, so, my first interest in the law was because one of my friends who I was going to school with in Catholic school in the 12th grade, long time ago, before you were all born or even thought of, uh, was that he got stabbed to death, right? His name was Chris Groom. And so at that point, once I saw that happen and saw him, laying in that casket, I felt, there's something wrong here, right? There's something wrong in the world and people need to be held accountable. So I developed a very strong prosecutorial orientation of hold someone accountable for doing wrong things. So when they assigned me to the commissions, everyone knew I was a prosecutor leaning type guy, accountability guy, fair, but get the job done. And I got put in defense. So you say, well, what's the big deal? Okay, well, the three cases they gave me were Hassawi, which was one of the 9/11 that helped the Twin Towers come down. Osama bin Laden's public affairs officer. Okay. And this kid, Mohammed Jawad, who allegedly threw a grenade and harmed some troops while they were trying to collect intel on the street. He was 12 years old at the time. So when I was assigned these cases, my mom called me and I said, yeah, I'm on the defense and I'm doing this and all that. And then I heard my dad in the background and there were bad words being spoken. Traitor, disgusting, you name it, you can imagine it. What in the, bleep are you doing? This is, you're betraying everything that you've done for the past 20 plus years. So that's hurtful because it's from people you actually care about their opinion from, right? And the hostility was very real and palpable. Disappointment, all that bad word stuff. So, it shook me, right? And I went in for the sit down with the head guy. He was a colonel, Army colonel, really unbelievable attorney. He wound up in I think one of these state Supreme Courts somewhere in the Midwest. And he said, you look a little troubled. And I said, well, I'm a little disappointed, sir, because I thought I was going to be on the prosecution side and, they put me in defense and I really didn't understand that when I got the assignment. And he said, well, grow where you're planted. I said, well, I understand that, sir, but, this is a little bit, overwhelming that I'm going to be in a position to defend someone who contributed to the, Twin Towers coming down like that. That's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. And he said to me, he said, well, here's the thing. We have this little thing called the Constitution, right? And are they entitled to a fair proceeding? I said, absolutely, 100%. And he said, well, a fair proceeding could result in them getting the death penalty. I said, well, I understand that. He said, well, your job is to guide them through that proceeding and hold the government accountable. And he said, can you do that? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, then justice will be served. If they've done what they've done and they're guilty of what they're guilty of and the process works the proper way because you're there making sure it does, then everything will come out the way it's supposed to be. He said, if you can do that, you'll be fine. So I said, you know what? I made it. I took an oath, right? I also swore as an attorney to do certain things, ethics and all of that. And I said, all right, I'll take it on. Roger that. So he puts me into these three cases. They were all active litigation. I went down to Guantanamo to sit with them for a first interview. Hassawi, the short story there was basically, I did it, death to America, you're a pig, get out of here. Okay, no problem. So I'm condensing 2 hours of nonsense into a few minutes. Then I got into with Abulul, who was he's a very interesting character. So he's very articulate. He speaks English very well. He told me about, I guess, the jihad and the 700-year war, and we're all gonna crash and burn and blah blah. And the only reason he had taken the meeting was because I was a Marine. It was interesting, just to put a plug in for the Marine Corps, even though we're a bunch of knuckleheads most of the time, is that they had fear. They had fear and respect for the Marines, because when we go in, we hurt people if we need to. And so they understood what we were about. And he had refused any meetings from any attorney for 4 or 5 years. And I was the first time that he was being talked to. So I was also being taped by the government. It comes to, as it comes to be. And so that was a little bit disturbing, right? Because those are supposed to be sacrosanct conversations between an attorney and a client. So remember your oath. Remember your oath. Remember your oath. Because just because the United States is doing something doesn't always necessarily mean it's beyond reproach. Okay. Even within, you have problems. Okay. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm telling you, hold people accountable wherever they be, not just because they're wearing something or they look a certain way. It's not like that. Okay. Actions dictate things, right? Consequences. So as an attorney, that perturbs me that someone's listening into my attorney-client privilege conversation. That's not the rules, and those aren't the rules of the game that I signed on to, and neither did they. So that's a problem. So anyway, we move into Mohammed Jawad. Remember, I briefly mentioned that I was in Iraq, 05, 06, and one of the things I used to do was I have to go around and they call it detainee operations. So I would have to evaluate people on the battlefield that had been picked up for different purposes. Okay, and I'm being vague on purpose. And so I had a very good sense of someone who was interested in jihad and someone who was just wrongfully, either in the wrong place, wrong time, or, just really not intending to do anything or had the capability of doing anything. So these are judgment calls, of course, but based on a lot of time and experience, you get some sense of this. So I come into the room. Everyone knows what a teenager looks like, especially when their pimples are coming out and they're still going through puberty. And so I walk in there, and this looks like a teenager. Okay. In through the translation, he sounds like a teenager. He's not talking like an adult. And the fundamental thing he said to me was, "I don't know why I'm here. I just want to see my mom." Now, I'm going to tell you that every terrorist that I've ever met, not one of them has ever told me they want to go see their mom. Okay. That just is not a typical thing that comes out of a terrorist's mouth. Okay. They're usually going down swinging by the time they get to me. So I didn't understand that. Something told me in my gut that this guy was different from the other two that I was dealing with, right? I'm still going to give them whatever defense they needed, this, that, and the other, but I had to take stock as in terms of what was going on here, because I couldn't understand his age. Like I hadn't gotten access to the file yet. I wanted to do an initial interview just to see what's going on. So I went back to the commission's office in DC, and I asked for his file. And I'm going to tell you, and this is embarrassing for the commissions for sure, that no one knew where it was. This kid had been in there for 7 years. He had 2 other counsel that I joined a defense team on for, and no one had looked at his file. So again, I'm going, something is wrong here. There's something wrong here, and I don't know what it is, but I'm going to start figuring it out, because I don't like what's happening, right? Whether he's guilty or not the issue. Whether he needs to be dealt with or not the issue. What the issue is the process is broken here. We have a broken process. So I find the file. It was in some secure filing cabinet that no one had touched for years. The dust on it was almost embarrassingly thick. And I start trudging through it. And I found the silver bullet that the government had. I found his guilty plea. The place they said he said it. And you know what that was? What it consisted of? It was a blank piece of paper with his thumbprint on it. That was his confession. He couldn't read. He couldn't understand anything. They took a 12-year-old because we had bone scans. The United States knew he was a child. These facts are not in dispute. Child, 12-year-old. Afghan government took custody of him, handed him over to the US government as the guy with a piece of paper with his thumbprint on the back of it. And that is why he went to Guantanamo and was detained for 7 years. And, oh, by the way, and I love America. Like if you ever question that I'm a patriot, we're gonna have a problem. We're gonna have beef. I'm just telling you right now, this is not anti-America. This is anti-stupid. This is not what we should be doing. I'm just telling you right now. Oath, remember? Oath. So not only was he not guilty, he was innocent. Okay. And part of that, and this is public record now, you can go look up the case file. I think they still hang it on the commission site. He was taken into interrogations time and time again. It is public knowledge that he was tortured. Okay, literally tortured. And I'll explain the torture because it's important. So one of the methods of torture, which this is public, this is all public record, is sleep deprivation. So at some point in time, President Bush determined that sleep deprivation was no longer to be utilized and it had to be, stopped. They took Jawad, this child, into interrogation 2 to 3 months after that order came from the President of the United States, who happens to also be the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, right? So he's in charge of the military, last time I checked, and said, don't do this. The commander authorizes this to occur, the sleep deprivation torture method, and they did it 3 times longer than was authorized under the law when they were doing it. So not only did they disregard the orders from the office of the President of the United States, they also disregarded the order that controlled the scope and nature of what they were supposed to do in the first place. This was so bad, so bad. This entire scenario is so bad that during the motion session in front of the senior judge in the Army, he's the senior judge of the entire U.S. Army, sat in a courtroom and issued an order. It's in the order that says someone should be held accountable for what happened here in this case. That's a U.S. military judge, got no bone to pick with anybody, and he was visibly disturbed with everything that had come out in this matter, to the point where I proved with no doubt that he was not of any intelligence value. And oh, by the way, when we got the records in the case, the U.S. government said the same thing. So for 5 years, they knew that he was of no intelligent value, yet they continued to torture him in detention down in Guantanamo. You have a child that they are saying that he has no intelligence, and they're still torturing him to try to find information they know he doesn't have. Okay, this is what we call not good to go. Not good to go. So President Obama comes along, and if you may remember, I don't know if you recall, but I'll remind you that the promise had been to close Guantanamo. So for at this point, I was actually like, this is probably a good idea. We need to take these people to like New York or somewhere else, get some federal prosecutors involved, the federal judges, get them through the system, get them confined or out or whatever needs to happen. But something needs to happen because you shouldn't be sitting there. Remember that due process clause of the Constitution? Speedy trial, all of these crazy things that we have. Okay, none of it's happening. Okay, what I'm talking about, you're going to sit there for 7 years, get tortured, can't talk to anybody, and then all of a sudden, somebody else comes in and this perpetuates in perpetuity. We still haven't convicted the 9/11 people who have confessed to their crime. It's 2024. 23 years these people have been sitting there and they still have not been adjudicated. Okay, this is a problem. So Obama comes along and says, time out on the commission. So we're like, okay, mini yay, let's get this reconstituted and into a better platform because we're clearly not getting this right. But it did open a door. It opened a door to habeas. Because if you didn't have any end in sight under the law, if there was no process in place that was going to achieve something, then you actually had an opportunity to pursue habeas, and we did. So we pursued habeas, and I went to Afghanistan to collect other information. And one of the things that I was able to do, because I'm a little crazy, and it got me in quite a lot of trouble. Yeah, if you don't think I'm crazy, you're not listening. So I go to Afghanistan and I filed a petition in the Afghan Supreme Court. American attorney files a petition in the Afghan Supreme Court. Now, if you know anything about our court system, that's like going to the U.S. Supreme Court and showing up and filing something direct. Like, hey, you got to listen to me. Now, there's a little thing that comes up very rare in your life as an attorney, and it's called original jurisdiction. There are very few little things that are sitting out there that you have original jurisdiction. That means that you can go straight to the top. You don't have to go through the trial process. And one of the things that was in the Afghan Constitution was the fact that if someone was wrongfully extradited out of the country, that could be heard by the Supreme Court of Afghanistan. And what was interesting about all of that is because who wrote the Afghan Constitution? We did. We did it at the Bonn Convention. The U.S. drafted this thing. So I was able to interpret it because we modeled it after what we wanted it to say. So I walked that into the Supreme Court, and instead of filing it because I wanted to get some attention and get the country, whatever, because no country had asked for anybody back from Guantanamo. That was one of the problems. So I wanted Afghanistan to understand that this was not a good case. The United States shouldn't have this young boy, and they need to return him. So I walked in to do the filing. They put me in a room. It was a huge room, very, very ornate. And I'm like, this is quite a waiting room they have here in Afghanistan. And I had been around Afghanistan. I was like, I've not seen anything like this. Well, it was the Supreme Court Justice's Chief Justice Chambers. I didn't know that until he walked in. And he said, okay, start arguing. So all of a sudden, I went from filing this document that I did a lot of research on to oral argument in front of the Afghan Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, which I was not prepared to necessarily do, in terms of mentally, but situationally, I understood my argument, so I was able to lay it out. And I basically said, listen, he was wrongfully removed from the country. It's clear by these facts, and these are independently verifiable. So he went back, reviewed the petition, came back, and he said, okay, let's say I agree with you. What are you asking me to do? And I said, well, under your Constitution, which we wrote, you have to order an investigation to your Attorney General. Then the Attorney General makes an adjudication as to whether the request is returned if it was wrongful, and he would issue a letter indicating as such. And so the Supreme Court Justice said, okay, hold on a second. He picks up the phone, calls the Attorney General, says the Attorney General will see you in 2 hours. So they transmitted the complaint over to the Attorney General. The Attorney General reviewed it, and by the time I showed up, he had written a letter. It said, bring him home. I was like, oh, this is good. So I may be the only American to ever won a Supreme Court original jurisdiction motion for sure. So anyway, so I come back to the United States. We hand that to Judge Huvel. She's now retired out of DC. And she says, government. And those are beautiful words when you're dealing again, if you're litigating against the government, because that means they have to answer some questions they're not probably prepared to answer. So the government gets up and says, Your Honor, we have new evidence that he's a terrorist. We have new evidence. And the judge is like, oh, and started like backtracking. I said, Your Honor, if I may. She said, yes, Mr. Montalvo. I said, okay. First of all, it's been 7 years, and we've not heard one time that there's new evidence in this case. Okay. And if we were in the middle of trial and that evidence wasn't in existence. So what I would like to know is what Bates numbers, because we number everything, what numbers of the pages do we have in discovery that are new so I can review that. So they generated the numbers, and I found out that all of that was actually in the file, okay, very quickly, because I was the only one who looked at the file, remember? Neither the defense, nor the government, nor anybody else in between had ever looked at this file. So you have this is under Obama, remember, so this has nothing to do with politics, this has to do with process, right? So the DOJ attorney gets up in a courtroom and says to a federal judge that there's new evidence in the case citing these numbers, and when in fact that those numbers were contained in the original case file. So it was new to the attorney, but it wasn't new to the big G we call government. Okay, so we would call that a lie. Okay, because it's not new to the government. It was new to you because you just read it. It's not new to the government because you've been sitting on this for 7 years. So the judge says, you know what? Mr. Montalvo is correct. He's out. You have 30 days, ship him. So I flew over to Afghanistan around the 30-day mark. Government refused to let me know when he was getting released. And because I promised him when I met him in Guantanamo that I would meet him in Afghanistan. I told him I would be there. And when he found out, he fell to the ground and was crying. So they flew him over to Afghanistan. I didn't know that he was inbound. I got there. It was around 1, 2 o'clock. I went to take a quick shower from the flight over, because we got to go through Dubai and up into Afghanistan, into the private airport, because I'm no longer in the military at this point. And then ACLU was helping me fund at this juncture. So I go in and I said, check with the Attorney General, see where he's at. So the Attorney General says he's actually on a helo going to Pul-e-Charkhi. So Pul-e-Charkhi is a notorious prison over there in Afghanistan. So they were going to re-incarcerate him. So if you know anything about me, which you may know, but I'm going to tell you right now, that pissed me off. And when I'm pissed off, I get a little, agitated about it, and I start doing things, okay? And so what I did was I actually knew the Minister of Defense in Afghanistan. We can get into that another day. And I called the Minister of Defense. He said, what do you want me to do? I said, I want that helicopter sent to the Attorney General's office right now. He's in your airspace, and I want to see his face in the next 20 minutes at the Attorney General's office. He said, done. So I go over to the Attorney General's office. This was an international incident, actually, because the State Department was tracking on this. You had generals. I changed the entire airspace. So I met, and then he came walking through the door. They had chained him to a floor for the entire duration of his flight from Guantanamo back. And he looked like hell, but he had the happiest face I think I've seen on a man in my life when he saw me, because he knew he finally made it free, at least for the moment. So we took him home, and his mom didn't believe it because he was an adult now. He was 19. And what she did was she had dropped him when he was a baby. That's not a joke. It's a legitimate story. And she put her hand on his head, and he had that knot. And as soon as she touched the knot, she knew it was him. And then she lost it. I might have cried on that day. I'm not admitting anything. So that was a moment. Now, what I'm saying here is that there was a lot of wrong here. That doesn't mean as a country we're evil, okay? But it means that people were not holding themselves to the right standard when they were doing things that were not even within the prescribed law. And that is not right, okay? If we got to play by the rules. If we don't play by the rules, we're going to be animals. And if we're acting like animals, then there's no boundary. Okay. And lawyers are really the line. They are they are the red line in the sand. Okay. We are sometimes the only thing between us and the wilderness. And we have to take that oath very seriously because we're the ones that can hold people accountable. It's a very powerful, it's an honorable thing to be able to do. And if you do it right, you can make a difference in people's lives. Okay. There are people that are out there that lie, cheat, and steal. Okay. It's just happening all over the place. And lawyers can make a difference. Okay. I'm telling you right now, I have made the difference in people's lives. I have changed the outcome of their future. I have gotten, unbelievable outcomes for veterans, private sector people, all sorts of things. Not because I'm all that in a bag of biscuits, it's because we try really hard at my firm and we care. We want to get to the right outcome in the ethical way, right? Ethics actually means something for attorneys. So if you want to go down the attorney lane, you're going to become an attorney through an oath. You're going to become, you want to go into the service, you're going to become or serve the government, you're going to take another oath. Those are not words. It's sort of like the Hippocratic Oath for doctors, right? We shall not harm, right? We have to hold the line to protect the integrity of the process, not the outcome. It's not the outcome. There's no like loophole. There's a process that goes back many, many, many years. And there are a lot of people that have invested time to get us to this point to carry forward. And we have to be true to that. Otherwise, we're going to turn into a country that doesn't really have accountability. And you can go around the world and see the corruption and the harm that does to people and your average person. I mean, look at Afghanistan, for heaven's sakes. How many billions of dollars went into that hole? Okay. And those people are not only no better than they were, they're worse off now because the Taliban is right back where they started. And we paid for that in blood and treasure. So we really need to take stock in making sure that we're advising commanders, if you get into that business, where you're out there holding people accountable or understanding or defending someone in the right way because they're being wrongfully accused. These are very meaningful roles as an attorney. And I take that very seriously, and I've taken it seriously as soon as I, was blessed to come into the practice of law. I think I found where I belong. Not everybody belongs here. It can be stressful. It can be hard. There's a lot of hard stuff that you deal with in the law, but it's rewarding if you care and you get it right. Okay, so that's my big war story. I think I saw some questions.
Just one of the questions we had was, so if you're not going to wear the uniform, whether our questioner said that she was aged out of it, but there's a million reasons why you might not want to wear the uniform, but still get into this area of law. Do you have any advice for those that want to take the non-military path for getting engaged in practice with military and military adjacent topics?
Sure. So, the nice thing about government service is there are so many different opportunities to contribute to the team, both in defense and on offense, okay, from operational to environmental. So you really have an open door to just about any type of practice you really want to get yourself into in the government. I mean, we can look at monetary policy. You can look at, legislation as a congressional aide. You can become part of be a federal judge's clerk and learn how the bench operates. I mean, there's so many places in the federal government that you can go to figure out and contribute to the team. When you look at the FISA stuff in the federal courts, I mean, that's important stuff, happening. So in terms of, whether we can, snoop and poop and how we can snoop and poop and all of these things. There's all these programs out there. So, obviously $3 agencies have a need for legal-minded individuals. They seek out lawyers on a regular basis. Sometimes you become operational if that's the path that you want to go. So you can have a legal education and not necessarily practice law, but be in an environment where you're dealing with the law. So, just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you have to hang a shingle and start billing by the hour. That's not what's going on. So if you're in the government and having a background in the law, you may contribute in a number of different ways, that are not necessarily traditional, legal office orientations. So there's a long list. I could get with you offline, to run through some of that. But I think the most important thing is networking is important. Okay. So as a student, knowing someone who knows someone to get you into a door is more important than you can understand. Okay. It really is about who you know. So that's an important way for you to explore opportunities. Internships, externships are great opportunities. And I would encourage you to taste different things to see what sticks. If you really know where your soul is at and what you're looking for, then you can narrow your search, right? And you can start looking for those opportunities within the federal government because they exist. Just about everything we do as citizens is reflected in the government sector, right? Because it's usually regulated, right? So you're just, there's always a counter person, your shadow in the government that is, on the other side of whatever you're really dealing with. Be a FOIA, let's say Freedom of Information Act, which seems like a simple thing, right? And it's been made into such a complicated thing, but the government is supposed to keep records and give them to the public if it's a valid request. And the government routinely messes this up all day, every day. Okay. And they play keep a ball, and you're not supposed to do that. So I've been a FOIA officer on the inside and had to deal with this. And then I've been litigating against it on the outside. And it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it can be, because you get all sorts of information from the government that is actually interesting, for the government, for the public interest. You see the news agencies, always suing the government for information from the government, and that usually breaks loose a lot of information we've never seen had we not gotten it. So, and there are good attorneys in the U.S. government that are defending these litigations and trying to uphold what they believe are the agency standards about releasing and stuff like that. So just a simple thing like that turns into a kind of a big deal sometimes. And, and that's just one small thing in a whole plethora of different options. So think about substantively what you like. If you align yourself with something that you have some enjoyment in, like let's say you're into sports, like right now, the WNBA is like top of mind for everybody because there's all this back and forth about, these new players that came into the league and blah, 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 and I want to be an entertainment lawyer, right? You can find a path, because first you find a person who's connected to that practice, then you become acquainted, and then you have a conversation, then you understand the path, and then you follow that path, and then maybe you'll get into entertainment law or sports law or whatever, making movies, whatever you have some passion about, I think is the best way to find your place in the law. Because if you enjoy what you're doing in practice, then you will absolutely flourish. Okay. My resting place for myself has been litigation. I enjoy accountability and going through that process to make sure that my client can see something from point A to point B and some resolution or outcome. Not everybody's a litigator. Litigation is very stressful. Litigation is somewhat of an unknown at all points in time. You don't know what the end of the story is going to look like. There's a lot of risk there. So there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of back and forth, and usually a lot of costs. So no one ever really wins in a litigation. It's a Pyrrhic victory, as they like to say. So, but it's where I found my place. But not everybody likes this stuff. Some of my associates hate litigation. They rather do transactional work, or they'd rather do whatever. One of my associates became a general counsel of a nonprofit that she loved from her teenage years, and was able to finally make the transition and take over. And so she's so happy over there, and contributing to the world in her way. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. So look for it, but find someone that or find someone that that knows someone in the place that you're wanting to go, and then start having that conversation. And then you can find out if it's really someplace you want to go, as opposed to what it looks like from the outside.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap up tonight. I'm looking at our list of attendees, and I know not everybody is pre-law and law school, but it looks like a big bulk of people are in the education process. So can you tell our pre-law and our law members specifically, what is one piece of advice you wish you had going into law school?
One. Okay. Grades don't matter, but understanding what you're doing does, right? So grades always matter because there's a system, there's a hierarchy, right? But if you really want to practice law, learn the law. Pay attention in law school and get the fundamentals because they will help you moving forward. Okay. And then my other 1B is if you have the opportunity to clerk for any judge, do it. Lawyers have to talk and they have to write. And writing becomes almost the most important thing you ever do as an attorney. And writing well, writing persuasively as an attorney is your sword. So if you want to sharpen your sword in the best way, you clerk for a judge who's calling balls and strikes, and you will learn the good, the bad, and the ugly because you're going to see it come into the courtroom. So pay attention, immerse yourself in the law. It's a profession. That means we're always learning. So you will never stop learning if you become an attorney. You have to engage in learning. It's like the profession of arms. We learn how to kill people in many fun different ways. Well, in the law, you got to learn how to use the law in perpetuity as the law changes, evolves, etc. Learn your law and then learn how to write.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to give one more moment. If anybody has any other questions, put in the Q&A. Well, thank you very much. Lindsay, did you have any final questions you wanted to ask?
No, I'll let you wrap it up.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I know you're a Department of the Navy member and you've got feelings about that, as all Marines do, but go Navy. I think we can all agree on that. Thank you very much for your time and your insights. And to all of our attendees, thank you very much for coming. This has been recorded, so it'll go up in the File for Delta archives. And I hope I see you all at convention this summer. If you're not registered, get registered. I'll see you there. With that, thank you all very much. We'll close it down for the night. Thank you again, Eric. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.